What's up, guys? I'm Bind, and today I'm bringing you a digital painting study that I did recently. And I wanted to get into the question a little bit of why you should or shouldn't do painting studies, what they're for, why you might want to do them, and what the other advantages or disadvantages are of doing them. So, also, got myself a new sponsor, so let's get into it. Now, guys, don't get it mistaken. This is not tracing a photograph, right? And you will see this in a second when we get into the study itself. That is not what I'm doing. I'm having the ref up and I'm painting alongside the ref the way you would in any other study. And yeah, tracing an image is a whole different story. It's very own story, in my opinion. Very briefly, you should not do it. It's not a very good exercise, but maybe we'll talk about that another time. So without further ado, let's get into the study. All right, so you can see how my setup is here, and that is basically I have a canvas and then I expanded that a little bit and I put up the ref here and I drew a little grid. That is something that you can do. It helps you to understand complicated scenes, helps you to subdivide the image basically, and understand where things are located. So this could be, depending on the complexity of the scene you're doing, this could be a good idea. So what you see here, what we're doing here is establishing the sky. So I'm doing these a little bit in a very traditional way. So I start from the back. I want the foundation that is not white and a little bit of a color that can also bleed through other stuff than which I'm doing on top. So first we're doing the sky with a little bit of a rougher brush and some smudging, because I don't want everything to be so perfect, and that is something that is a huge deal when it comes to doing photographs. If you try to be perfect now, you're going to suffer, and you are going to hell, basically. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that is what's happening, because you cannot be so accurate as the photograph, else you will take like 100 hours doing it. So you want to first establish the rough shapes that we're dealing with. And I'm doing this here with the lasso tool. You know, it's kind of my favorite. But of course, you can also do this with a regular brush, just blocking in shapes and then going from there. So this is going to be, I would say, the midground, the plane on which architecture is happening, basically. And I'm doing this I'm always going from shadows first. But you could also apply a different logic, and that would be you go with the biggest volume of color you see and you put that color, that similar color, as first blocks of color. So whether you want to do that or go always from dark to light or always from light to dark, as some people do, that is up to you. But yeah, you will have to consult, I think, the ref for that. The ref will, in my opinion, tell you what is the most convenient. So here you can see filling this shape just as a one color first. And if you pick the color right, you will find something that is, I would describe as a clear advantage of doing these studies, and that is you will realize how little detail you can get away with for things to work and for people to understand what they see. And this basically, you could call this the illusion of detail, like I think I put on my post over on Instagram. And that is because if the color is on point and if the shape has enough context, with other shapes, you don't actually need as much detail. Your brain will think that there's detail where there is actually no detail at all. That is pretty interesting, because that we can utilize this in our free creative fictional work as well, if we understand how this works. So then you can see I did a little bit of a drawing with a darker tone here, and that is because this complicated shape in the middle that is not rectangular at all, I shouldn't say at all, but very much not rectangular, I need some lines that serve as orientation, and that is what I'm doing here. So you will see that I have the grid very faintly, so I can orientate if I want to, but the grid does not influence perception so much that it is all red or all bright white or all dark lines. I don't want that to happen. I just want it as orientation if I absolutely need it. And also, we can make some changes to this image. Don't think now, oh, this is a study, I have to replicate this exactly. I think, in fact, you should make changes. And the changes you should make is where the photograph lacks. Now, what do I mean by that? Because lacking is that's a big word, because you could argue the photograph is perfect, right? But what I think is that it's not perfect. It's just what happens to be there. So in some cases, compositions through those buildings is not optimal, and you can then just cut the building or make it smaller or change the facade a little bit. But yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later when I actually make some changes to the image. Right now it's still the main shapes that are about to come, and you don't have to do this in a particular order, but I feel like you should go from big to small. So for me, first was, I think, the shape on the right, that huge facade, and then the middle, and now it's the left facade, which is behind stuff, and it's frankly not that important, because the composition puts it in the back. It gets overlapped with other buildings and trees and other stuff, so naturally it doesn't feel that important. What you can see here is how I fuck up with the perspective, because as you can see, I'm not using a perspective grid, I'm going purely by eye, and sometimes this can really trick you into making the wrong estimations, basically. So that is what happened here, but then I quickly controlled it. And again, of course, you can draw the perfect lines, and you can do this with a grid, but it will take you a lot longer, and will be much more tedious. And I think these kind of studies, they should not be tedious. They should be very intuitive. You have something that is nice, a nice design, which is the image itself. So that is a clear advantage. The design is given to you, so you can focus on how to best reproduce it, utilizing the brush strokes. And also, frankly, you can experiment with the brush strokes, which is great, which is what I'm doing sometimes, that I'm just see what brushes I can use, I can get away with using, and try to smudge a little bit, try to blend a little bit, and try to stylize the image a little bit more than it is in the photograph, because as I said it before, that is a clear advantage. Now that there is no style presented to you, it's just you could say a plain photograph. Also, you could say that I'm going to the details of that background a little bit too fast, and that is probably true. So I'm not without flaws in that regard, because what I feel and what my problem is in this case, in these cases, is that I feel like, oh yeah, the right, I got it in the back. That's, I can already kind of see it even though it's not there, and then I just put it off for just a little bit too long, right? Now this street and the color, the tone, the contrast of the street is very important. It's what makes this scene a little bit, because there is a faint diagonal, and then on the top left you have the yellow bright building that opposes that. So that is an important thing to consider here. Now I'm doing the drawing again, drawing with tones that also fit into the image. Basically, they are the shadows, right? And I'm drawing lines with them that help me orientate and subdivide the image further, because again, I these cityscapes are rather complicated, right? And I made the same mistake here. I thought, yeah, this is easy. I'm just drawing this, and then while drawing is, I was like, yeah, wait a minute. Okay, this is not as easy. There's actually a lot of angles and a lot of different objects that demand different perspective here, that don't always align very well. So of course what's inside the facade, it aligns, right? It's parallel mostly, but then the building in the middle is not parallel to that. Not really, right? So in reality, stuff is not all 90-degree angles, which is, then you will face this problem by if you're interpreting something like this. So again, here there's a little bit of problem with the perspective. Yeah. Fortunately, you can rectify these problems fairly easily if you don't fall into the trap of putting too much detail. And I cannot stress this enough. If you later see the final image, or you look at it on Instagram, you will see that there is an illusion of detail, but there is no actual detail. And that is not to say that you cannot later put more detail, but you should never, ever, under any circumstance, do this in the beginning, at this stage that the image is right now. If you're starting doing detail right now, again, you're setting yourself up for disaster. So yeah, now I'm doing, you could argue there's bigger strokes to do than what I'm doing. Yeah, also I'm rewatching that for first time right now. So yeah, that is sometimes interesting to look at stuff you did later on, and then you always have to criticize yourself. I think it's really what helps you move forward. So this detail is not that important. What should come really before that is the sign on the right side of the facade, and some of that bigger stuff on there. But already what you can see is that the image is looking very comprehensive. You can understand it already. You can understand the depth, the color. Already there is a little bit of the illusion of detail going on the road, I would say. So that's getting along nicely. The middle structure is the most unusual, of course, and that is also why I kind of chose this image. And if you struggle with perspective, first of all, watch one of my videos on perspective. And secondly, maybe try a different subject for now. Maybe ease into it, right? Get maybe a center road photograph of a street first, something that is not so multi, it doesn't have multiple perspectives, right, into one image. Because what you cannot understand, it's very hard to draw what you cannot understand, and that is where the mistakes get made. That you all know, that you can see, this person just drew this from the ref and he didn't really get it, and there's subtle mistakes in perspective, and they stem from not understanding how perspective behaves. Because even on a photograph you cannot see everything, right? There is stuff that is obscured, and then the lighting maybe gives you a different impression of shapes, and you have to correct this in your head while you're painting it, even though you're just repainting it, what you see. But what you see is sometimes is might be playing tricks on you, right? So it's not always as easy as just I just have to repaint that. And as for that sign that came up now, just now, I feel like I have to explain something to you guys. So I cannot write Chinese, and hence I just do gibberish. I just scribble gibberish that vaguely looks like there is something. And I do this not only with foreign languages, I do this even with my own language and with English as well. So because I don't want people to be distracted on by words, because words are very powerful, and I don't want to the image to have any message through words written in the image. So I just don't write anything. I just will write letters that nobody can read, almost like a fantasy language, right? So there is a little trick for you if you ever ask yourself, oh, what should I write there, or what is written there? I cannot read it. Doesn't matter, guys. Nobody wants to read that. So now I'm correcting some of the stuff because now the foundation is really there, and I'm just correcting stuff that is that I am now understanding a little bit better, and trying to pull the image together a little better. Now there is a mistake, you could say, and that mistake is that I still left some of the facade on the right empty. It's not done, but I feel very compelled to resolve the middle now. So that's why you're seeing me work on that instead of the obvious stuff that is missing, right? And I think that is very human to do. And it's not a big issue because we have the ref. We don't have to resolve it in a particular order, but of course, especially in the very beginning, it is important that you bring the big shapes first. So also there's people in the ref, and while I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself whether I should bring the people or not, and I think we end up getting the one guy in the middle, which I think is really cool to have. So now is a little bit of the light reflection. And by the way, guys, so far in the beginning I used a little bit of a crazy brush for the sky, which you don't have to do. And for the remainder of the process, I'm basically only using the same brush, which is like a marker brush that reacts to pen pressure, and that has a slightly hard edge to it, and some edges, right? So it's not a round brush that I'm using here, because painting with a round brush when it comes to architecture is not really convenient, since the architecture rarely has round edges, and so you probably don't want to resolve a lot of the round brush edges later. So there's another gibberish coming up here, which is the sign on that shop, which I forgot what it says in the photograph, but I think it's English even, and I'm changing it to something that looks like characters. And the important thing is the color, right? To have that bit of a red, that's what you really want here. And again, the words are not important. Yeah, so this is one of the few times where I actually utilize more than one layers briefly and then recombine them, just to be faster, not to have to paint around the characters or anything like that. That is just a pain in the ass sometimes. So I will utilize the advantages of digital here, obviously, right? Even though this is not an image that has a traditional layer order, and you could paint most of this on one layer, which actually I'm kind of doing. At the beginning, I was definitely doing it, and then I think I cut up some of the layers, and now we have a vague order of layers from front to back, the way I always preach, but you don't have to have it. You can theoretically just, as I said, paint it all on one layer. Now, I made up my mind of whether to bring the trees or not and how many to bring. So I will bring this one and then another one on the left, but not the one in the background, because I want you to be able to look down that road a little bit clearer than it is in the ref. But there's another instance where I'm deviating from the ref. Also, the shape of the tree is deviating. It was the tree, I found it to be too unbalanced, too much leaning leftwards. That was not what I wanted. And also the leaves were too much for my taste, and overlapping too much and demanding too much of attention, and therefore. So I'm making it smaller and I'm making it a little bit straighter. And that is the second one. And again, I'm using the same brush as for all the architecture, which should be, in the case of the study, well, depends on what you want from the study, I would say. But if you want to focus on color and shape, you should understand the brush that you're using. And of course, there is the possibility that you want to use the study to try out some brushes, as I said earlier, and that is fine to do. But that will probably mean that the style will lag a little bit and you will take longer to do it, because you will go through a lot of brush selection, trial and error, basically. So now the image is pretty much all there, except for our guy in the middle. And now I want to do some blending, but I realized that I couldn't do it easily without cutting apart the layers again. So that's what I'm doing here. Now I establish this layer in the back, and take away a little bit from the facade. It was too much for my taste, and now we're doing a little bit of a blending, which is where I now deviate from the ref, because that blending, that shadow is not in the ref. I just thought it would look cool and give some distance to that building, and leave some space in between the middle and the building. I'm putting a little bit more details that you cannot actually see in the ref. Also, that middle of the building here, I'm just making that up a little bit because there's not much I can see there, and it's not a very compelling shape. And I think it ends up not being very compelling too in my version, but I just wanted to feel a little bit more chaotic and not that well behaved. So I'm bringing some smaller lines to indicate some illusion of more detail, and making this a little bit less balanced than it is in the ref. And now finally, finally, we're doing the facade that I, for I think 20 minutes, forgot about. So, and the nice thing here is the green, which is actually not a green, it just looks green here. It's more of a blue. But that is really nice because it gives some color. It's more of a cyan, I guess. And I'm mixing that in here, and then later we also will use it in some blending, because that really gives some vibrancy that also in the ref you don't have it. So I'm making everything a little bit more colorful than it is in the reference. Yeah, mixing some tones from the facade and putting some little cables and some metal rods and what have you. And yeah, you don't have to overdo this. You have to limit yourself in terms of the detail too. Um, and you mostly do this by the brush tip size, I would say. So if you use too small of a brush tip, you will have the problem that it will look too thin and too detailed, and then you have the impression that everything needs to have that level of detail, which is a mistake. So don't paint with too small of a brush would be my recommendation. And now I'm trying to quickly resolve these stairs, and you cannot see them in the ref, the way that they end up on the sloping walkway basically, and that is very tricky because I don't know how the architect was doing this actually. Come to think of it. So eventually, of course, we'll put a guy there, but for a moment there I was very curious if I could resolve this or not. Now everything works so far, and you could now at any time basically call this quits and say, okay, study is done, it's rough but it's finished, and people would not object, I think. And that is because we have everything there, and we have a nice contrast, and we have a nice color composition, and nothing is feels really like it's completely empty. Now is the question, how much of the grass detail do you put? And the answer is always less. It's always less. Let the brain do the work. And then I'm going to do now more and more, I would say, stylization work, which is what that blending is. That again does not exist in the ref. I just made that up because in the ref is a white blending from the back, and that happens a lot in photographs where it overblends whitish, and it doesn't always look very good. It looks flat sometimes. So I'm doing this more like an illustration style now. I'm putting more blues and more blending there. And I'm just deviating from the ref here. Now, the guy was actually in a pretty cool walking pose carrying some stuff, so I kind of resembled that. Not exactly, but yeah, in the end it worked out. And also, of course, that guy alone has the power now to resolve these stairs. Which of course you should not depend on, but in this case I am missing the actual information of how this plays out behind the guy, right? So there's a lot of that also in the photograph that I was talking about earlier, that you don't know how the actual perspective and the shapes and of the structures actually work. So now there's a little bit, yeah, smaller details emerging. And yeah, like in some of these really help to sell the level of detail and bring it kind of semi to the next level, even though this yeah, you could say help the illusion of detail a little bit further. And those are stuff like these railings and stuff like the tree branches, right, which are a little bit more intricate looking, and it gives you the impression that the other stuff is on the same level, which is not really, right? But you have to be careful with that because stuff has to integrate. Grouping some tones here on those wooden beams. And now you can see that I'm really doing some of what I would consider to be the smallest level of detail that I allow myself to do in this image. And that is actually a good way of thinking about detail, is you're allowing yourself to do a certain level of detail and you need to stop yourself from doing more than that. Else it spirals out of control. So I'm asking myself now, what do I want? What do I need? Because I know I'm finished, and I could say, okay, I could wrap it up, but I know that the little stuff that you put here and there and the little smudges that we'll see in a second, they help sell the image a lot more and make it look a lot more polished than it actually is. So again, with the brush that is the smallest detailed brush, some reflections over here which are rather nice. And then something I put also off for too long is that to resolve this corner. And now I'm kind of taking my time because why not take half an hour longer to really polish the image, right? So it took like 2 hours, and then I put half an hour more here at the end just to do some little stuff that you could argue barely makes a difference, but I would say it makes a small but important difference. So yeah, now comes as predicted comes the smudging tool. It's something I just like because I do a lot of hard edges in my style, and I break them apart a little bit through the blending and through the smudging here. Trying out some color dodge blending here, which is, yeah, you can see how easily you can overdo this. And most of the stuff I'm not actually using it. I just want to experiment a little bit. What is the limits of the blending here? And I think we reached those limits. And now we're really resolving some of what still bothered me, and then we'll finally do some of the smudging I was talking about, starting right now. And it's subtle sometimes and it's not so subtle other times, like with the tree. And on that road you want to resolve this the hardness of the stroke a little bit. And yes, you could instead just take a softer brush, but then you risk, for me personally, I would risk to paint everything too softly, which I think is a terrible look. So that is the reason why I always do it the other way around. I will paint it harder and then smudge it or blend it later. But that is personal preference, of course. Yeah, there's no one fits all in this regard. And of course, you can also see, I should elaborate on this a little bit, that the smudging now is happening on top. And you can tick the little box that says include all the layers, and then you can just smudge over everything basically, which is very convenient because you can then switch it off again if you want to, or you can erase from what you have smudged, which is also a nice trick, a really nice trick. And yeah, in a minute here, I think we're almost done with this. Some last touch-ups here, making this even more unreadable. But yeah, that is also personal preference, of course. You can feel now that the image gotten a lot tighter, and it's time to either do the next level of detail or just call it quits, and that is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm changing the canvas back to its original. So it's only the image. The ref, I don't need it anymore since I'm done, right, with the image. Now we combining some of the layers, see what could be the optimal contrast, like I also like to do, but not changing it that much actually through the levels here. Just a tiny bit more contrast. Yeah, but that again is also preference. So now the thing left to do is, of course, to cheekily sign the image, which I thought I was clever here. Look at this. But then I realized that it's not in the middle, the signature, and it kind of looks off. So yeah, we'll do it in a different way. But anyways, guys, this has been the image. And in a second, we'll now look at the final piece. And yeah, see what we've done. And yeah. So anyways, guys, this is the image we arrived at. And let me know what you think about that process down below. So guys, that was the demo. I hope you liked it. I have to say I underestimated this a little bit, this photograph, because it is quite intricate perspective and different objects that align differently. So I thought I would pull this very quickly, and in the end it took me almost twice as long as I thought I would, right? So let me know if you ever did studies, if you're doing studies, and if you're doing them as master studies or if you're doing them from a photograph like we did today. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching and see you next time.